Last year, the Oxford English Dictionary's word of the year was youthquake, citing a surge in turnout amongst younger voters in the UK and New Zealand elections. The word captures the growing importance of young voices in the politics of those countries. Joining us for their view on youth engagement here in advance of Ontario's municipal elections, Edna Ali, Executive Director of the nonpartisan advocacy organization, the Toronto Youth Cabinet, and Tamer Ibrahim, Youth Collective Impact Manager at Laidlaw Foundation. Welcome to you both. And it's your first time being on TV, right?
Yeah.
It's awesome to have you here on the agenda to talk more about your organizations. Edna, let's start with you. What projects does the Toronto Youth Cabinet work on?
So we are the City of Toronto's official youth advisory body, as well as an advocacy body. So our work is centered around ensuring that Toronto is youth-centered, youth-friendly, accessible, and equitable for young people. So the work that we do is split up in different working groups. So we have teams of young people dedicated to the city budget, or equity and employment, or community safety, for example.
And Tamer, we met this year because your organization, the Laidlaw Foundation, hosted the Youth Town Hall debates for the provincial election. What does the Laidlaw Foundation do?
So the Laidlaw Foundation it's a private foundation that's based in Toronto that's really interested in supporting youth-led initiatives, tackling a number of issues in communities across Ontario. So we fund right across the province. So if you are a group of young people that's really interested and passionate about something that you want to be able to tackle in your community, we offer a number of granting programs that are able to help groups of young people come together and be able to address those issues. We also have partnerships with the Ministry of Children and Youth Services and Inuweave, which is an initiative based out of Ottawa, supporting us on a program called Youth Collective Impact, where we bring organizations together to address one particular youth issue in their community and create meaningful change around it. So that's the work we do.
And in my time around you, I think this is just beyond work. You're very passionate about this work. Why are you so passionate about it?
Well, I think it has something to do with the fact that I started out working in a grassroots organization out in Regent Park, and it was just really interesting to see what young people were really passionate about in the community. We found that young people are really interested in a number of priorities and issues and have opportunities to not only just find success in their own lives, but also to be able to address them within the community as well. So when I had an opportunity to work at this grassroots organization and see this kind of work happening, I said, you know what, this feels a lot like home, and I think that something wonderful can come out of it.
And it seems like we're surrounded with elections. The provincial election just finished, and now we're heading into the municipal elections. Are youth concerns often something that can be addressed at the ballot box? And I'll start with you.
Yeah, I definitely think youth concerns are at the ballot box, whether we're talking about transportation or the affordability crisis here in Toronto, for example, around housing. I guess the question really comes around, are we framing these issues with a youth perspective or context? Are we asking questions in terms of how it's going to impact young people today? Or are these strategies and initiatives that we're looking to develop, are we kind of more forward-looking? Are we looking at how it's going to impact young people 10 to 20 years from now?
So more long-term, not just now.
Yeah, so when we're thinking about now, I find we don't necessarily, unemployment, for example, we don't necessarily frame it around how high our youth unemployment rate is. Or if we're looking around transportation, we're not kind of thinking about who's inheriting all of these plans that we have that are going to come into fruition in the next 20 years.
And Tamer?
In terms of the work that young people are doing, I mean, I think some of the work that's happening at the foundation and the young people that we're supporting, we see that a lot of young people are really interested in some of the systemic issues.
What do you mean by that?
In terms of, we recognize that young people are really interested in, seeing something that's happening in their community, and they want to be able to build a coalition and say, okay, we recognize that something isn't working, and we want to be able to create some change around it. So, and I guess that that's in part due to the nature of the work that we do. The young people that we normally talk to are generally advocates and they're champions that want to be able to see those kind of systemic changes within their community. So that's generally the discourse of the conversation that we're having.
In spite of what you just said, what you've also said, Edna, we still have this idea that when it comes to voting that, youth don't really care, they're apathetic. Is that true, or is this just something that's just, older people get wrong? You both laugh. I'm one of those older people, okay? Don't judge me. Edna, what do you think?
That is such an interesting kind of thing to say about young people, because I see engagement every day with the young people that I work with at the Toronto Youth Cabinet, whether it's hyper-local in their neighborhoods, in their communities, in their schools, in their community centers.
But does that translate to the time when it's, do they vote?
That's a great question. I'd love to know. I know we have the numbers federally, but I don't quite know in terms of provincially or municipally how many young people are voting. And I guess if a young person isn't necessarily going to a ballot box, I guess it's a question of, do they think there's impact there? I
will say, however, that the young people are engaged in between the times of elections. So we find a lot of leadership initiatives going on in communities across Ontario and even around the world. In the United States, we're seeing that particularly the anti-gun movement that's happening in the United States right now, that's a movement that's predominantly by and for young people and trying to raise their voices and their concerns about what's happening on the ground.
Does something like that affect youth in Canada?
I mean, I think it does in some respects. I mean, young people are listening and they're very attentive to what's happening in the world and often are trying to say, okay, well, how can we translate this to some of these particular issues that are happening on the ground for us?
What reasons might make young people feel a bit turned off from participating as voters in elections?
I kind of spoke to that earlier. Are we considering youth perspectives in these questions that are on our ballot boxes when they're coming together and when the issues are framed around transportation or housing?
Do you think that young people are an afterthought from the other demographics?
Definitely. I see that a lot. We don't really ask in terms of how our young renters or millennials, I suppose, how are they being affected by these issues, or how there's going to be work done to address how it impacts them.
We need to change our platforms when we're communicating with youth across the province when it comes to talking about the elections and things of that nature. Traditional media outlets perhaps are not the platforms that young people are turning to. They're more engaged with social media. One of the things that the Laidlaw Foundation did in partnership with TVO around the Youth Town Hall is we made sure that we streamed it online via social media on Twitter.
So you went to them?
Exactly, right. Yeah. So we initially went to them, and so we thought it would be a great avenue to be able to have people engage. It was one of the #1 trending topics in Canada and across Ontario. Can't really say initially how many young people were engaged in that, but it certainly did generate some buzz.
Well, you brought up the numbers a couple of times, and despite a reputation for low engagement, voting numbers in recent elections have shown youth may care more than most think. For the 2015 federal election, first-time voters, 56.4% turned out to vote, and voters aged 18 to 24, that was 56.2%. Should we expect to see this kind of youthquake at municipal elections in Ontario in the fall? Edna?
I certainly hope so. I think now more than ever, folks are really seeing what's at stake. And the Toronto Youth Cabinet definitely is going to be doing lots of work around the election and engaging young people and hearing youth perspectives around these issues. And hopefully ensuring that candidates who are running are keeping this community or communities in mind.
And what is the Laidlaw Foundation? Are you going to be doing something to maybe affect that? To get more youth to come out for the municipal elections?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we did for the provincial elections is we launched a pop-up grant that's designed to provide some funding for young people that want to engage other young people in the provincial elections. We're going to be doing something very similar for the upcoming municipal elections.
And you brought up something that I thought was really interesting just a few moments ago. Do you think that if politicians were to focus on one particular issue for younger people, that they would actually have more of an impact in getting them out to vote for them?
I would think so. I think it'd be really interesting to see a campaign that's geared to young people, listening to the voices of young people that might be able to engage them in being a voice and advocate for others in the community, to be able to take part in some of the conversations that they should be having with some of the candidates.
The Samaras Center for Democracy did a study about how youth engage with politics. Here's a bit about what that study found. Those blaming apathy for a precipitous decline in youth voter turnout need to rethink their diagnoses. Voter activity is lower among those 18 to 29. However, this age group is more likely than its elder cohorts to engage in other forms of political activity. Such activities include attending a political meeting, volunteering for a candidate, giving a political speech in public, or organizing a political public event. Tamer, why might some youth be inclined to engage but not necessarily at the ballot box?
That is a very good question. I think I'll draw on some of my personal experiences when I was growing up. I mean, one of my first involvements in the municipal government was we had applied for some funding to host a festival, and unfortunately we were declined for that funding. But the city had set off a pot of funding designed for people that wanted to do a deposition at City Hall in front of city councilors and have them, change their mind about, have them change their mind about this funding and say, you know what, you should approve us because we're doing some incredible work. And that was my initial entrance into, looking at sort of municipal life. It was an interesting experience because, you had to sit there, all the city councilors are looking at you, you got about 3.5 minutes to make your case, and that's it, and then you're out the door. Unfortunately, we were unsuccessful, but I think what it did was it opened up my appetite for really trying to see, okay, there is a world out there that's designed to be activated and be accessed so that you can go in there and say, you know what, I have something really important to say. There are other things beyond just going to the ballot box where you can have a voice during the within municipal parties and within work on municipal government. So I think it was just by chance, and it was a wonderful chance, and we took action.
Is it intimidating, though, for someone who's younger to approach these older politicians?
Definitely, and I think even approaching institutions, I'm giving a Toronto context like City Hall, for example, can be extremely intimidating for a young person. You might come in not necessarily thinking what you have to say has value or that you don't have the right expertise. And so I think it's important that we open up these spaces. I think one thing that the Toronto Youth Cabinet does is we always ensure that our meetings are at City Hall. So we're opening up the space to young people as a place that they can go to, a place that they can take up space in and make their voices and ideas heard. And we are trying now to also engage young people with their counselors so that they know.
In what ways?
Meeting them, engaging with them, knowing who they are in the first place as well, and knowing that this is someone that you can, as a constituent, whether or not you can vote, as someone who you can go to with your concerns.
Are some counselors more accessible than others?
It kind of depends in many respects. I mean, if you are in a community where transportation is a challenge, just kind of getting to where they are could be a challenge. And yeah, it can be a challenge in terms of establishing that relationship with them.
So do you think that politicians, counselors, they should have the onus in getting to know younger people and to communicate with them?
Absolutely. I think of, there was, so Councillor Neethi Chan, for instance, he started out as a youth advocate and eventually became a city councillor, has always been a voice for young people for many, many years. And I think what's wonderful about Councillor Chan is that he really looks at the system that discriminates young people and says something needs to change about it in order for young people to be able to access it and be voices and have voice and be leaders within their communities. So I look to him for leadership, and I say, you know what, there are some councillors that are certainly stronger voices for young people than others, and he exemplifies that tremendously.
So maybe he can influence his colleagues in a way.
Absolutely. I mean, he had an opportunity to come out to a convening that was hosted by the Laidlaw Foundation, and we had the former Minister of Children and Youth Services, Michael Cotto, at the time there, and he had a chance to speak about some of those priorities and said, young people cannot be stigmatized, they cannot be criminalized. We need to be able to say they have something to say, and it's important for them to be able to reach people across communities and be leaders in the communities.
And maybe to also understand that they do have the power of the vote. How do you get young people to understand that their vote can make a difference?
That's a really, really great question in terms of whether or not their vote, because it, as you said, comes with a lot of power in terms of selecting who will be the representative of their communities. But I guess it kind of just goes back to what we've been talking about in terms of whether or not young people think that that has more impact compared to other avenues. I think it's a matter of really kind of reframing our education around voting and civic engagement in that respect, because if a young person thinks my ballot or my vote doesn't necessarily matter, I think it's really speaking to them saying that they don't necessarily think in that particular moment in selecting that representative, that's a meaningful way for them to enact change, as opposed to, say, other means like petitions or protesting, or workshops or other avenues for them.
In Ontario, you take a grade 10 civics class, and you learn about the election process, politics. Do you think that's an effective way in helping students understand and engage in civic issues?
It wasn't for me. But what I did find was it was an opportunity to learn that these entities were out there. My initial experience, and something that I encourage all young people to do, is talk to your city councilor and volunteer for your city councilor. Go out and canvass for your city councilor and have a chance to go door to door and talk to some of the people in your community.
I think that's kind of easier said than done, though, right?
It can be. It can be in some sense. I think it takes a lot of courage, and it also takes a lot of time to, adapt to this environment and say, perhaps it couldn't be for everyone. But one of the things that I found a great deal of value in understanding politics and really engaging in politics was to be able to volunteer for a city councilor and just have an opportunity to talk to canvass neighborhoods and talk to some of the people, become a scrutineer and keep an eye on voting ballots and see what's going on. Because when you're immersed into that environment, I think what's wonderful is that city councilors are surrounded by policymakers and strategists that talk about some of the priorities of the ward. When you just listen in and absorb all that information, it's actually a wonderful opportunity to really learn on the ground what's been happening.
So sitting in a classroom, and because you said it didn't work for you, was it just because the information, you weren't able to understand it, or it just didn't, there was no reference point for you? There
was no reference point, and there was as if there was a line that was just drawn. I was just receiving information about, civic engagement, and that was the beginning and the end of it.
So going into the field, you actually feel like, okay, this is what it is, and this is how it's done.
Exactly, and it wasn't initially part of the conversation in class, but rather, this is what exists, and that was pretty much it.
So let's talk about issues. We're almost out of time. What issues can we expect to be prominent in the middle of the minds of youth in the upcoming municipal election?
Kind of the bigger issues that have been spoken to for quite some time now in terms of whether we're talking about, and this is coming from a very Toronto-centric perspective, but transportation, housing, and also community safety. And I actually just wanted to quickly jump on that point in terms of civic education. I think one thing is we don't also empower young people. I tend to, whenever I'm in a space with a lot of young people, especially high schoolers and grade 10s who have taken or are taking civics, like to ask, okay, so who here has told you to vote before, or it's to encourage you to vote? And all hands go up in the room, and they usually roll their eyes. And then I said, okay, who's told you to run when you turn 18, in addition to voting? And usually they kind of give me astonished looks or confused look, why would anyone kind of encourage me to run? And I think that's kind of one fundamental issue that we should also be exploring in terms of what does it mean to be an active citizen? And it's not necessarily just solely voting, but being engaged in other ways. I think young people have lots to offer, just beyond putting ballots out, but also being on those ballots as a candidate.
Well, in the past provincial election, there was a number of young people that ran, including Sam Oosterhoff. So you think that if you see somebody your age doing that, it influences you to say, okay, I can actually impact change. It's not just about me voting, but me actually being an active citizen.
It makes it seem as though it's something legitimate. If you do see someone your age doing that, I think it really makes it a reality. I think that sort of representation is really essential in terms of guiding people's paths and seeing what's potentially possible.
And Tamer?
I would say that in terms of some of young people's priorities in the upcoming election would probably be Housing. There's a lot of young people out there that they can't afford to buy homes, and when they're diverted into the renters market, some of them experience discrimination in certain cases. I think gun violence is going to be a big topic that's coming up.
So community safety?
Community safety, absolutely. And I think we're on track to meet the numbers of the year of the gun back in 2005, which is unfortunate. Carding is going to be another big topic that's going to be at the table for young people, because a lot of them are experiencing discrimination around it. And we know that there's a lot of, there are small coalitions that are already addressing those particular issues. Civic Action is doing some work on the ground. Citizenship Empowerment is also doing some work around police carding and how to have police work with disengaged communities. So we're seeing some of these priorities being addressed right now.
And just to pick up on what Edna said, we have like a minute left.
Yeah.
But to circle to the beginning of the conversation where youth might not feel like they're part of the conversation, or politicians are not addressing their needs. So do you think, as what Edna said, that maybe more youth need to run and make change that way?
Absolutely. I think we need to change the discourse and really empower young people to be leaders. I think what's going to happen is we're going to see some new ideas, things that are a lot more innovative in terms of what our priorities should be, because people are tired of the status quo.
And kudos to you both. You're doing some really important work, and I have to say, not to be biased or anything, you're probably two of my favorite people. So yeah, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.